Hello everyone, welcome to our Truth Be Told YouTube channel, with your host Rick Howard and Mike Maney.
Hello everyone, Happy New Year 2024, and another session with Mike Maney from Missoula, Montana, and Rick Howard from Modesto, California. Actually, I live in Riverbank, which is a little suburb of Modesto. And the motto of our little city, Riverbank, is the city of action. And we laugh about that anytime my wife and I are at somebody else's house or away visiting somewhere. And it's time to leave, I'll look at my wife and say, "You ready to go home to the city of action?" Because it's one of the most misnamed cities there is. It's very little going on in this little town, which we like. Someone told me one time that years ago, many years ago, that this little town of Riverbank had one bar in town, and it would have live music and dancing on Saturday nights. And because of that one place and that one event each week, they decided to call it the City of Action. And of course, these days, we wish each city was limited to one bar at the most.
Yes.
But that motto stuck, and so we have a lot of fun with it. But today is January the 3rd, 2024. It's amazing, isn't it, Mike?
Yes, it is. Yep.
I've been teasing my granddaughter and grandson in junior high and in fifth grade that, because I don't do this anymore, I do all my writing on the computer, and I barely can sign my name anymore because I hardly ever, never do cursive. I do handwrite, it's printing. And my wife always uses cursive, but I never do. If you saw my handwriting, you'd know why. But I told them when they go back to school next week, for about the first 2 weeks on all of their papers, they're going to put 23 instead of 24, because you got to retrain yourself on which year. Of course, a lot of us use the first few weeks of the year on our checks. We hardly ever write checks anymore.
Right. Yeah.
We'd have to correct the year first few weeks. But God has brought us through another year. We're thankful for that. And we received good rain through the night last night to start off the year. So we're thankful for that. We're a little bit behind in rain, so we need some big rainstorms. They haven't been cold enough, so we're not getting a lot of snow in the mountains. So already people, farmers and things, are worried because 90% of our rain comes in December, January, and February, and we've not gotten any big storms yet. So we're looking forward to that. But it's actually been fairly mild this year, not hardly anything below freezing, and days of sunshine in the 50s or low 60s, which is pretty nice. I think you've had a pretty mild winter so far, haven't you?
Yeah. As far as snowfall, it's almost embarrassing. But we've had fog off and on, what they call freezing fog. I don't know how they determine all this, but it's been cold. It's in the 20s.
Yeah, but for you, that's not that cold in winter time, is it?
As long as it's above zero, we're good.
Of course, winter officially really is only about 2 weeks old. So you've got some cold months ahead of you.
Yeah.
But we're thankful for a new year, thankful for the year that has passed. And as we're recording this on January the 3rd, 2024, just before noon, our dear brother Dave Barnum, member of the Citrus Heights Trinity Church, and a longtime personal friend to Mike, and not as long, but still a good personal friend to me, is undergoing, I think you said carotid artery surgery. His neck.
Yeah.
And it's one side is almost completely plugged, so they want to clear that up. So before we came on, we each said a special prayer for that, and we hope that by the time any of you watch this, there'll be good news of success and recovery and so forth. He's he's an important person in our life. His family, his son
Right.
is the pastor of that church, and he is one of the most wonderful wives in the world. Debbie.
Yes. Yes.
We look forward to hearing good news about that. But speaking of the Barnums, we hardly ever look at the comment section of these videos. We started out looking pretty often, but it was always blank.
Yes.
And so we got out of the habit of going back and looking for comments. And we got an email notice from Brother Braden Barnum, Dave's son, the pastor of that Trinity Church, on one of our sessions. I think he said it was session 85, which would, in our time, would have been almost 2 months ago now.
Mhm. Yeah.
And he left a comment on that video about maybe a couple of things we overlooked in Numbers 16 and 17. And part of that is, as we were going through Numbers, starting out, we thought, well, maybe 3 or 4 sessions in Numbers hit the highlights. Well, I think we've been on 7 or 8 sessions at least in Numbers.
Uh-huh.
I think every session for the last 3 or 4, we started out by saying we hope to get to Balak and Balaam today, and we still haven't gotten there yet. So apologies to all of you for misleading you. But partly because of feeling a bit of a rush. I don't know why. We shouldn't feel a rush, but to get through Numbers, I think part of it is we're anxious to get into Deuteronomy. There's a lot of good stuff in Deuteronomy.
Mm-hmm.
We overlooked a couple of things in Numbers 16 and 17. So this dear younger brother of ours took us to task over it.
Yes, he did.
Us that we had overlooked. So I wanted to read what he wrote in that comment, and then maybe Mike and I can add some to what he had to say. But he said, "Good brothers, I might have missed it since I listened to these at work, but did you discuss the pictures of Christ in Numbers 16 and 17? And the answer is no, we did not. We didn't discuss them, or if we did, it was briefly. In order to atone, and here's his take on number 16. In order to atone for the sins of the people, of course, you got to go back into number 16. That's that famous story of Korah and the rebellion, and all those who were killed in that rebellion, and the reaction of Moses as intercessor, and the role of Aaron in helping to stop the plague that God was using to punish those people. And so he picks up at the end of that chapter, 16:48, where he says, "And he," meaning Aaron, "stood between the dead and the living." Well, I got to go back and read the previous sentence completely. In order to atone for the sins of the people, Moses sent Aaron into the midst of the assembly, where the plague was already taking hold of the people, to offer incense. And then number 16:48, and he, Aaron, stood between the dead and the living, so the plague was stopped. And that is really a great verse.
Yes.
Looking for Christ in the Old Testament. Because we all have the plague of sin. God's wrath is upon us. We deserve his wrath. We don't deserve mercy. But Christ, as Braden says here, Christ is our high priest who stands between the living and the dead. And of course, just that statement, Christ stands between the living and the dead, I immediately see Christ on the cross. Then I immediately see him in his resurrection, as Braden will go on to bring out number 17. But standing between the living and the dead, you know, there on the cross, he was hanging between heaven and earth. And that distance between us and the God of heaven and the creator of the earth was magnified by him hanging in between, and his arms outstretched, reaching out to those. And he was reaching out to both thieves, wasn't he? But one repented and believed, and the other did not.
Yeah.
And Christ reaches out to us in mercy and love, and God honors his sacrifice and the blood that he shed. And for Jesus' sake, not for our sake, but for Jesus' sake, God saves us and forgives us and accepts us and justifies us and all those great Bible words. But I'm glad he brought this up. And before we move on to the next one, we want to encourage others. We've said this all along. If you see we're overlooking something important, or you feel like we need to add more to what we're already saying, write a comment, and maybe about 2 months later, we'll deal with it. Better late than never.
Or after the turning of a new year, in this case.
And by the way, at the turning of a new year means also at a New Year older for Mike. His birthday is on New Year's Day.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look closely, if you zoom in, you might find an extra wrinkle or two. I don't think you can find any more gray hairs because they're all gray hairs. But at least he has hair. So I can't say much about that. Happy birthday, Mike, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Thank you. Moving along.
But thank you, Braden. And we really do encourage others. We want your comments. We don't want, great video. Thanks for your good work. And I mean, we'll accept it. It makes us feel good. But give us some of your own insights.
Yeah.
Give us some of your own thoughts on some of these scriptures.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly if we're overlooking something, because we're trying to provide partly in these videos sermon material, lesson material, study material, seed thoughts for you to build your own sermons and lessons from. And the more we help each other and encourage each other and provide some of these seed thoughts, the better it is for all of us. And, I mean, Mike might know the whole Bible, but I don't yet. And so, I can always learn more from you who watch and listen to these. And please do what Braden did, and then pray for us that we find it sooner, that you don't have to email us a month later, and ask if we had read it.
Yes.
But we'll try to start doing better. We got discouraged and disheartened and frustrated and broken spirited, and by going back each time looking for comments and not finding any, that we got out of the habit.
Well, all we found was cobwebs.
We did find a few likes and thumbs ups. And early on, Dean Pounds up in Washington and a few others along the way would offer some comments that we appreciated. But we were hoping for more, to tell the truth, and not just for debate reasons, but we were hoping that maybe the comment section would also turn into conversations about sharing with each other, and maybe pointing out things to each other, not in an argumentative style, but that they could be kind of like study guides in the comment section besides the video itself.
And to make a point, because Braden did this, here we are discussing it. And so if others do the same, we'll be discussing what they have to share.
Our hopes were high in the beginning, then our hopes were shattered, and then Braden has renewed our hopes once again.
Just like the rod of Aaron, we've been revived.
It takes very little to renew our hopes.
Yes.
So thank you, Braden, for doing that.
Yes.
And he mentions in number 17, in order to prove who his, meaning God's, high priest was, he gave Israel the sign of the rod that budded. So, of course, the aftermath of the rebellion of Korah is that God wanted everyone to be sure who God's choice was. And this comes back to a subject we've brought up often, the subject of election, God's right to choose. And God chose Aaron. And, you look at the life of Aaron, and you look at sometimes how he worked against his own brother Moses, and sometimes he worked with him. He was kind of a mixed bag. So sometimes you wonder, why would God have chosen him? God has a right to choose for his own reasons, and he chose Aaron, and the people didn't like it, and they wanted, not that so much they were against Aaron and Moses, but they wanted equal status, or they wanted a more prominent place than they had. And they actually, when you're looking at Korah and some of those who stood with him, they already had prominent places as Levites and other functions within their tribes. They already had positions of influence, respect, but it wasn't enough. They wanted more. And so God let them know in a very dramatic way, I make my own choices based on my own reasons, and if you rebel against it, you'll pay a price. Your job is to submit to my election. Your job is to surrender to my will, not me to your will. And he had to make that point over and over again in the wilderness, didn't he?
Yeah.
So he gave Israel the sign of the rod that budded. God's true high priest is that which was dead and comes back to life, or as Hebrews 7:15 and 16 says, and it is yet far more evident if in the likeness of Melchizedek there arises another priest who has come, not according to the law of a fleshly commandment, but according to the power of an endless life. So I'm glad he brought that one up too. That chapter 17, if you look at it in your Bible, it's only 13 verses. But there's a lot in that chapter. And I think I'll just read through it real quick, just 13 verses. This is the New King James translation. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and get from them a rod from each father's house, all their leaders according to their father's house, 12 rods. So 12 leaders, one from each tribe. So he's not choosing men who are not known, but men of respect, leaders among the tribes.
Yes.
And he's going to show that even though they are leaders in their particular tribe, they're not the one I've chosen to be high priest. So pretty dramatic way he does it. Write each man's name on his rod, and you shall write Aaron's name on the rod of Levi. There shall be one rod for the head of each father's house. Then you shall place them in the tabernacle of meeting before the testimony where I meet with you. And it shall be that the rod of the man whom I choose, there's election right there, will blossom. Thus I will rid myself of the complaints of the children of Israel. I think that means for the moment, because there were more complaints to come.
Right. Yeah.
I wish he could rid me of my many complaints.
Yes.
I seem to complain more often than I should.
It comes with the ordination papers.
Has it? The right to complain?
Yes. Or at least the practice of complaining, if not the right.
The gift of complaint, which was given to you by the laying on of hands.
Yes.
Which they make against you. So Moses spoke to the children of Israel. Each of their leaders gave him a rod apiece. For each leader, according to their father's houses, 12 rods. And the rod of Aaron was among their rods. And Moses placed the rods before the Lord in the tabernacle of witness. So, I often stop when I'm reading a story like this at Liberty and say, please use your imagination. Please use your ability of your mind to draw a picture, to try to imagine what this looked like. What were the people thinking, looking on? What were the 12 men from each tribe thinking? What was just going through their thoughts? Because the way this story reads, this was not done within like 3 minutes.
Mhm.
This may have taken several hours. And it's like a buildup almost.
Yeah.
That God is building to a point, a
Mhm.
dramatic point,
Mhm.
because he wanted to make that point and he wanted it to stick.
Yeah.
He didn't want them to have to go through what they just went through.
Mhm.
I mean, it doesn't please God to kill a whole bunch of the leaders of his people.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
you know, if you can kind of use your imagination a little bit, as I like to use the term, put flesh and blood on it.
Mhm.
We read these Bible stories and we don't do that. But, you know, they were human like we're human. What would you be thinking if you were there
Mhm.
watching all this? So soon after many of them having just lost loved ones, relatives, close friends, mentors, men of respect, back in the previous chapter,
Mhm.
that would still be very fresh on your minds. So this event, as it was building, would have their full attention.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah.
So now it came to pass on the next day that Moses went into the tabernacle of witness, and behold, the rod of Aaron of the house of Levi had sprouted, put forth buds. That's not easy to do in 24 hours.
Mhm.
So a miraculous event by God. Had produced blossoms, and look at this, yielded ripe almonds or almonds, depending on how you pronounce that word. Where I live in the Central Valley is the number one area of the world for this crop, this nut crop
Yeah.
called Almonds. And even those who grow this crop, I'm around them all the time, grew up with them. I asked one man, 80 some years old, a while back, he'd spent his whole life growing almonds. And I said, how is it supposed to be pronounced? And he just laughed. He said, even the growers, some pronounce it almonds, some pronounce it almonds with a silent L. And I told him what I do with people, because I say almonds with a silent L. I say, I ask people when they pronounce it with the hard L, I say, how do you pronounce Salmon? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Silent L. Of course, every once in a while it bites me back because I know I've been in restaurants or I've talked to people about what they ate for dinner, and every once in a while one of them will say, I had salmon. So, you know, that's not a perfect way to go about it, but even those who grow it, some say almonds. Of course, there's an old joke. It's kind of a silly little joke. But when I was growing up, the way you harvested almonds was you had long poles. People just stand there with long poles, and they would knock them off the tree. It was hard work, looking up all day and swinging that, and then you have to rake them up, pick them up. But now it's all automatic with the sweepers and harvesters that throws tons of dirt and ag spray, poisons, you know, everything they've sprayed on them through the air, throws all that up into the air, and then we breathe it. So this air in the Central Valley of California is one of the dirtiest and most dangerous, seriously, places for air quality in the country.
Wow.
Because we have so much ag, so many crops, and a lot of them, you know, use pesticides. And of course, the fields have to be plowed and they have to be harvested. So you're continually throwing up that dust in the air. And then you're also throwing up pollens and poisons and all sorts of things in the air. So this is also a bad place for allergies and all sorts of things. Other than that, it's a wonderful place to
It's right next door to the place of action. I mean, yeah.
But almonds in this, we just have thousands and thousands of acres. And the old joke is, we used to knock them. Now they have shakers. So a machine tractor pulls up with this long arm and it clasps around the trunk and just shakes it for like 5 seconds, really short. And most all the almonds fall off the tree and without damaging the tree. It's hard to believe, but it works. And then, of course, they still have to sweep them. So it's still, the shaking throws up tons of stuff in the air, and then the sweeping throws up tons of stuff in the air. But that's a long way to get around to telling this little silly joke. That the joke was they're almonds with a hard L when they're on the tree, and they're almonds when they're off the tree. Because when you knock them, you knock the L out of them, or shake them, you knock the L out of them. So we may get a comment on that joke and say, you shouldn't tell that kind of joke on a Bible podcast.
Hey, at this point, we're desperate. We'll try anything.
That reminds me of another joke. Just people are going to start saying, you need to get on with your lesson. But it reminds me of another joke. This preacher, you can tell how old this joke is. This preacher is preaching, and during his sermon, he used the word britches. Somebody's britches.
Right.
And this elderly lady comes to the preacher after the sermon and says, I really took offense. That kind of word should not be used in church, in a sermon. Britches, that's kind of a vulgar word. And so the preacher looks at her and says, do you remember what I said before I said britches? She thought for a minute. She said, no, I really don't. He says, do you remember what I said after I said britches? She said, no, I really can't recall. He said, good thing I think sermon. So kind of a silly.
We had a little glitch. What was the punchline? We had a little glitch right now.
Oh, we sure did, didn't we?
Yeah.
So did you hear before
and after? Yeah, but then what did he say?
He said, good thing I used the word britches, or else you wouldn't have remembered anything of my sermon.
Boom. There you go. Mic drop.
Preachers always have a comeback. You church members better be careful. We always have a comeback.
Yes.
But not only had the rod budded and produced blossoms, there were ripe almonds.
That's
so months
amazing.
and months. Here in the Central Valley, we always look forward to the middle to the end of February. We may still get some cold nights. We may get they need some sunny days with not much wind or rain, of course, for about a week toward the middle to end of February for the blossoms to be pollinated. So they start blooming, and we have fields of white blossoms. It's just beautiful. And but the bees need to pollinate them, but they need, lack of rain and lack of wind and the lack of cold. So usually along about the middle to end of February, we'll get about maybe most of a week of fairly calm weather. It's just almost like God designed it that way.
Almost, yes.
And the bees get to pollinate. Once every several years, there's a year where the weather doesn't cooperate and not many of the blossoms get pollinated, and the crop is light that year. That's why they have crop insurance, so they can make up the difference. But my point is that's in February, and most almonds here are not harvested until August through October. So, you got at least 6 months in between bloom and harvest. Yet he went through that whole process the next day, it says at the beginning of that verse. So it was obvious it was a miracle, is my point. So it only took 15 minutes to make that single point. You preachers take a long time when you could have done it in 30 seconds. Then Moses brought out all the rods from before the Lord to all the children of Israel, and they looked, and each man took his rod. And the Lord said to Moses, bring Aaron's rod back before the testimony to be kept as a sign against the rebels, that you may put their complaints away from me, lest they die. Thus Moses did, just as the Lord had commanded him, so he did. So the children of Israel spoke to Moses, saying, surely we die, we perish, we all perish. They all realized what wrong attitudes they had, how God was making his point, and it scared them. Whoever even comes near the tabernacle of the Lord must die. Shall we all utterly die? So, instead of repenting and saying, sorry, God, for how we acted previously, they were only concerned about that they're going to, because the whole story of Korah and all those that died in the plague and all that was still fresh in their minds. So they thought, is this going to be round number 2 now? Is he going to kill more? So, of course, that would be strong on their minds, but God was making a point, and whether they got that point or not, it's not really clear here. But that Aaron's rod that budded, got put inside the Ark of the Covenant, along with a pot of manna, besides the 2 tablets of stone of the 10 Commandments. So that means that, we'd say the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments, which is the heart of the whole law, was the main thing. And then that mercy seat on top, and go through the mercy seat because we all break the law. And so we need that mercy seat and the blood sprinkled on top for atonement. And so that's a beautiful message. But evidently God wanted what Aaron's rod that budded and the pot of manna to be elevated in their importance in the eyes of the children of Israel. This, he could have selected a number of other things. He could have left them out, but something about this, who the high priest is, my election, was so important that he wanted that evidence, that proof, a dramatic statement of his right to choose the high priest. He wanted that inside the Ark of the Covenant. There's something there. You may need to help me. Here's the complaint we have about Braden Barnum. He didn't add enough of his remarks to these. He summarized it. Now he's going to embarrass us to leave the rest of it up to us on the fly, about extending this to not only is Christ the fulfillment of the law, he is the end of the law, the Bible says. He is, we would say, the law personified and perfected in a human being, which is the only time the law was perfected and completely obeyed by a human, was in the person of Jesus. So that's the 2 tables of stone. Of course, the pot of manna is easy. He is the only bread of life that sustains us daily. But then the rod that budded is also an important principle that God wanted in that Ark of the Covenant, of who God's choice for the high priest was. And the eternal high priest was not even from the tribe of Levi, but the tribe of the king, the tribe of Judah, but of the priesthood of Melchizedek. And of course, Braden had quoted that verse earlier in Hebrews 7, 15 and 16. So he was swerving into it, leaving it up to us to maybe comment further on it. But, and through that budding, that blooming, budding, and yielding ripe fruit of Aaron's rod that budded, going through that whole process in one night, Jesus went through that whole process in his resurrection. And he went from death unto life. Those rods, the rest of those rods did not bear fruit or life. And Aaron's rod was the same as theirs in the beginning. So that which was dead came to life.
Yes.
In Christ, our high priest. And he shares that life with us.
I think of that verse in Isaiah where unto us a child is born, a son is given, and of the increase of his kingdom, there's no end. I think of that process, how you just described that branch with the blossoms, and then eventually the almonds.
Yeah.
and how it just kind of just kept prospering or growing or developing. And so you think he's the high priest of this coming kingdom, and it's described as a kingdom that has no end.
That's a really good point. So that Aaron's rod that budded, normally we would say that whole process from bloom to harvest is about 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
So as far apart on a calendar as possible.
Mm-hmm.
It is the process of the development of the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
But then when Christ returns, it's going to come to full fruition suddenly.
Yes. Behold, I come quickly.
So that old saying, I think it was said about a bankruptcy or a depression or something negative politically or economically, but it could really be said about this. I forget who said it now, some famous person, that it comes about gradually and then suddenly.
Mm-hmm.
And the kingdom is like that, huh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It develops gradually in its natural process,
yeah.
like almond blossoms into nuts. But at his return, it's going to happen, as verse 8 says, on the next day. On the next day, it's going to be in its fullness. And we might say, we take those verses that talk about the extra 30 days or extra 75 days or 45 days at the end of Daniel, and we look at verses like Revelation 10, in the days of the sounding of the seventh trumpet. So the seventh trumpet may actually sound over a number of days.
Mm-hmm.
And so we may say the return of Christ to defeat his enemies, rescue his people, give them glorified bodies, capture Jerusalem, set up his kingdom, may in some ways be a process of time, maybe days, weeks, or months. I mean, there's going to be a certain number of time to find the dead bodies and bury them. So there's going to be a time process, but in another way, it's going to be so dramatic and sudden at his glorious return that it's going to be like this Aaron's rod that budded. It's going to be, you might say, on the next day, everything's different.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as that seventh trumpet begins to sound, it's almost going to be in our minds immediately or suddenly or quickly, is the Bible term, going to happen very soon.
Well, in terms of gamers, it'll be game over. And we see the drama unfolding where the people on the earth are clamoring to be hidden by the rocks, the caves, the fallen, because they see now it's a game over. It was all true, and they didn't give it the time of day, and now it's going to come upon them suddenly, like that thief, just suddenly, unexpectedly. But then I think once that heavens open up, I think there's where you see we're given one time frame of a half hour, but then I think other indications are, like you said, the days of the seventh trump. So I think this is going to unfold. Have you ever given any thought? I have one book in my library that he actually goes into quite extensive description that the people who are raptured, that the armies that are with him in heaven, the saints, when they come back, are actually going to engage in a physical battle. And he sees the blood on his robe out of Edom. And so this writer actually pictures a physical encounter with Christ and his army versus the armies of Antichrist, I suppose. And so
there is language in the Bible that who is this that comes from Bozrah with his garments dipped in blood?
Yeah,
he says, the blood of my enemies, the blood of his foes.
Yeah,
and there's even verses that indicate he's even going to make a trip down where Israel is in the wilderness, and that's when they're going to be saved in a day, and look on him whom they pierced. And there's lots of language about the true triumphal entry, march from Edom and from Bozrah, from the south, up into Jerusalem through the eastern gate. the Kidron Valley, and a processional march of the king coming into a city with his saints with him, and defeating his enemies even along the way. So yeah, I mean, unless you make it all symbolic or metaphorical or something, it seems a lot of it seems to be literal language of that. And I call it the true triumphal entry, because he said at the end of Matthew 23, "You'll not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" Psalm 118. They had already said it several days before at the what would you call it? Unsuccessful. I mean, nothing is unsuccessful what Christ does, but the unfulfilled triumphal entry.
Unfruitful.
They all quoted that same verse, "Blessed is he." They all said, "Hosanna." There was this procession. They lined the streets, waving the palm branches. They were trying to fulfill that promise of their Messiah coming into the city of the great king, Psalm 48:2. They were trying to fulfill it, like it says in John. They tried to take him by force and make him king. They were trying to force it into being, and Jesus rejected that first, what we call a triumphal entry, because he knew that a few days later, a lot of those same people would be saying, "Crucify him."
Yeah. Do you think they were trying to force the rod of Aaron, as it were, to blossom, and it wasn't time yet?
Oh, that's a good way to describe it. Yeah, it has to be God's timing, and it has to be when their hearts are ready for it.
Yeah.
Their heart was not ready for it.
Yeah.
They wanted what we now call the prophecies of the second coming to happen at his first coming. And so they downplayed his role as suffering servant for our sins, his death for his people, his death for his flock. His death covered all of that. And they didn't like, they'd been under oppression by how many world empires by this time. They were tired of it. And they wanted that promise of Israel being the head of the nations. They wanted it to happen, and they were hoping that Jesus of Nazareth would fulfill it because they had seen his miracles. They knew he had the power, but he was not fulfilling it. He was marching into Jerusalem. Was this him going to be declaring himself to be king and fulfill what we call the second coming promises at that time? They were so hoping and so wishing and so blinded by their own desires that what did Jesus do when he got into Jerusalem? He immediately went into the temple and cleansed it, which is basically showing why they weren't ready for him to fulfill all of those prophecies. And so when he comes back, they will say it again and mean it. And then he will accept them and forgive them. And just a lot of beautiful stuff there. I was heading toward another thought before I allowed myself to get sidetracked, but that happens easily.
It happens at your age, doesn't it?
Sure does. But I really like the idea of your taking that Aaron's rod that budded, the natural process being the development of the whole kingdom process. So he prepares the world for his ultimate expression of his kingdom at his return. And then also the fact that Aaron's rod budded and even became ready for harvest overnight, and also shows the suddenness of it. Oh, it's good.
So he's gonna harvest. He's gonna harvest Israel out of the desert, and he's gonna turn them into a bunch of nuts. You know, I was thinking too, because Brother
I
Braden,
just heard a moan out there in the,
you did, yes.
in the world.
You know, Brother Braden mentioned Melchizedek, and he was God's choice from even, you know, before creation. This was God's plan to set his son after the earthly order of Melchizedek. And so this was determined all along. Incidentally, I'll just give a shout out. The book that Brother Dave is writing, Brother Dave Barnum is writing, really is heavy loaded on Melchizedek and the ministry of Christ and the ministry of the man there that met Abraham. So it's going to be a pretty good book. I'm just going to plug it right now, but it's a ways out there as far as being ready for publishing.
Well, once again, one of our goals today was to get to Balaam and Balak, but that's a whole story in itself. I think that's a whole session in itself.
Yes, it is. Yes.
So once we get started, and I've got some car trouble I have to go take care of.
Oh, okay.
May have to have it towed in. It's in a parking lot across town that had to end up taking an Uber home last night because couldn't get the car started, and it was rainy and cold and dark, and there's no one around with jumper cables. So we just called an Uber and came home and said, we'll take care of it tomorrow. So I need to go take care of that. And hopefully it's something minor, just a jump or something, but it's not anything major. But so we'll get to Balaam and Balak in session 88. But I did want to read one more statement from Braden Barnum, pastor of Trinity Citrus Heights, where he closes his email to us, or his comments in that session 85. He says, also, now this was middle of November, I guess. Also, in Sacramento today, it will be 61 degrees, and the politics will be ... corrupt. So he's followed our example of talking about weather and politics.
We love Brother Braden. We love him.
If we didn't, we wouldn't make so much fun of him, would we?
That's right. That's right. But you know what? He's redeemed himself. He actually sent us a comment, gave us a whole
session based on
very inspired session. Yes. So thank you, Brother Braden. Shout out to you.
Now, if others of you are either, what should we say, encouraged or maybe scared off, I don't want them using me and keep referring to me on their session. So if you want to send it anonymously,
yes,
we will even accept those.
Yes, absolutely. Yes,
we're anxious for comments and remarks.
Right.
So jump in there. If we're brave enough or crazy enough or silly enough or dumb enough to make all these videos, putting our mug out there and our words for you to agree or disagree with on all these sessions, you need to have some of that to go on and make some comments or give us some feedback. So
yes. Yeah.
There's your New Year's 2024 encouragement / rebuke.
Yes.
To go do as we ask.
Yes, absolutely. And if all you remember of this whole session is the word britches, we've accomplished something.
Oh, we date ourselves every time. Old silly joke. We need to learn some new material.
Yes, we do. Yeah. Thanks, everyone, for watching today.
Thanks for our first session of the new year. We pray that there'll be a number of these and that they'll be a blessing. It's a blessing to Mike and I to do these.
Yes.
And we hope it's a blessing to those of you who listen or watch later. And we do want to say in closing that we appreciate all the help that Derek Rhodes has given us.
Absolutely. Yes.
And my personal, on my end time studies, he started helping me in a serious way, just maybe around Thanksgiving, maybe a little bit before. But by changing some things in my settings and adding some of those little short videos that people seem to love now. They love those little 2-3 minute short videos. He's drawn in enough extra viewers to where my subscribers in a little over a month jumped from about 50 to 350.
Wow.
350 subscribers on my end time studies.
Nice.
And I noticed some of them, when they subscribe, agree to give their names and where they're from and things.
Okay.
I think some of them are placed countries around the world.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of neat. Of course, Mike and I both in these videos, and me in my end time videos, are also wanting to use them as local outreaches.
Mm-hmm.
We would love for people in our own communities to find them, watch them, feel like they're benefit to such a degree that visit our church.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's as much of an outreach locally as it is an encouragement to our fellow Bible students.
Mm-hmm.
And we hope it accomplishes all the goals and desires we have for them. But thanks to Derek Rhodes for all his help.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Really appreciate him. Absolutely.
We are technically challenged.
We are. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you, Brother Rick.
Thanks, Mike.
And thank you, viewers. We'll catch you on the flip side then for session number. What session is this, Rick? Did we say?
Did I say? I don't even know if I said. This was session 87.
87 today. Okay.
We're getting up there close to 100.
We are, yes.
And start acting your age, Mike.
That's no fun. That's no fun. Bye, everybody.
Adios, everyone. God